Hey James, great to meet you. I'm Dan, Marketing Director at Sorted Group. Um, really just wanted to pick your brains this morning on kind of your views and the views that you're kind of hearing from retailers that you're engaging with on kind of customer experience and how that's changing or how that's changed throughout the year so far, and then what the lens is kind of moving into peak and then beyond that into 2021. So I guess to kick things off, it'd be really great to get your view on how you think, in particular, customers' delivery expectations have changed throughout the course of this year.
Well, I think obviously this year has been like a year like no other, as you all know, and as all of the retailer readers that we have know. Um, and I think while some people might say that customers have been more patient and willing to wait for goods during this period because they've been understanding, I think actually the retailers that have come to the fore are the ones that have continued to kind of really deliver for customers, quickly and timely and with the options that fit into their lives. So I think the reality is, and I know from my personal experience of shopping, if I can't get the product I need quickly enough and for when I want it, I will switch to find a retailer that can do that. Um, so in terms of customers' expectations around delivery, I almost don't think that they've really changed in a way. I think they've changed in the sense they want delivery to be safe and that kind of thing. And we might see some lasting changes from that. But I think delivery is always an area which is a key battleground for retailers, and I think this year has been the year when that's been very visible for everyone to see.
Mm. Do you think that key battleground that you talked about there, do you think that kind of existed in the minds of consumers pre-pandemic, or do you think the pandemic has kind of made that a really competitive and compelling thing that consumers base their decisions on as a result of the pandemic?
I think it's always been important, but I think the pandemic has clearly shone a real spotlight on it because in most purchase journeys, the delivery person and the delivery experience is often the last touch point that a consumer has with a retailer or brand. And clearly during lockdown, for many, essentially, for the non-essential businesses, of course, it was their only touch point. Um, so I think in this year, yes, it's really shone a spotlight on it. It's become a really big focus, and I think consumers, as we start, continue coming out of this period, they'll remember and stay loyal to the retailers and brands that have provided that service.
That's really interesting. So, I mean, in your role, you no doubt speak to lots of retailers kind of day to day. If you could pick three things that you think they're maybe particularly worried about right now and kind of looking ahead to peak, what do you think they would be?
Well, I think that it's been, obviously a very peculiar year. It's a once in 100 year event, a global pandemic of this magnitude. Um, so for a lot of business, particularly the grocers, obviously they've been operating at peak levels, if not greater than peak levels already for much of the year. So, but what we've seen through this whole period is that swathes of consumers who previously didn't shop online, who, preferred stores, have all become digitally literate because they had to be. So as a result, and as the news constantly is dominated by, local lockdowns and second waves in particular countries, and potentially our own country, we'll have to wait and see. Um, there will still be a greater number of consumers who you know, are going to want to reduce time probably spent in physical stores. So as a result, I think retailers are probably looking ahead at peak and thinking that, it's going to be a peak like no other. Um, and I think if you look at markets like China, and they had their, I can't quite remember the name of it. I think it's the China Spring Fair or something like that, which was in February, at a time when they were still having peak infections. JD.com and Alibaba, they saw, peak levels of trade during that period. Great, really huge peak level of trade. So I think that, retailers are looking ahead at this peak and, really aware of the fact that there could be a huge surge in demand, and that they're going to have to be ready to meet the challenge.
That's interesting. Very, I guess, thinking about some of the things you said a few moments ago around the experience consumers have had engaging with retailers throughout the pandemic, and that creating a lasting impression, perhaps, and impacting loyalty going forwards. Do you think there are any kind of single areas that retailers maybe need to isolate or hone in on to improve customer experience?
I think that there's always, yes, I do, because I think that a lot of retailers provide really good delivery experience. I think they're not always great at it feeling like a full extension of the brand, particularly in terms of, post delivery communications and that kind of thing. And I think that, like I've said, it's often the last touch point for consumers, even pre-pandemic. So I think that, it's that kind of final hurdle, isn't it? So I think investment there in customer experience is going to, drive real loyalty in the future, because you always remember the retailer based on the delivery experience they've offered and whether it's been a good one. And you tell your friends, don't you? You always talk about the retailers that have a great delivery experience, and that's often, for a lot of people, why they shop with certain retailers. So yeah.
Agreed. Do you think that there's been any kind of really shining examples of retailers who've pulled off a really good sort of delivery logistics feat this year with everything that's been going on?
Well, I think that there have been many, I think, is the answer, particularly the grocery sector, who literally were feeding the nation. And I think that to keep that going, and I know that getting delivery slots and that kind of thing was an uphill struggle for most people during that time, but they've obviously done a great job. And I think it's been interesting to see the different models that have sort of come out during this time as well, sort of drive-through models, and that kind of thing. And just I think the retail sector is really good at adapting and innovating anyway, but particularly when it needs to, and it has during this period. So obviously there's things like Currys PC World, where they allow customers to drive to stores with dedicated parking and pay for pickup of products, and that kind of thing. And also I think things like, going back to the grocers, the likes of M&S on Deliveroo, and Co-op already on that platform and that kind of thing. I think it's just making it much more accessible to consumers.
Well, I think the M&S Deliveroo example kind of really took the point around retail innovating, because that was a deal that had been talked about quite a while, hadn't it? And then what's happened really accelerated the conversations there, and it became kind of top of the priority list. So it's interesting seeing the kind of dynamics and how priorities have shifted throughout the year. Yeah. If you could sum up the kind of the feeling in the retail industry in 3 words, what would those 3 words be?
I would say pressured, because everybody is, and that's unavoidable. These are unforeseen and unprecedented, largely, circumstances. I would say pragmatic, because they have to be, and because we're learning all the time in a new set of ever-changing circumstances. Having to look around the world, what's happening, having to look at other businesses, both internationally and domestically, to see how they're pragmatically adapting to the changing situation. And then I would say focused as well, because it's although it's a challenging time for everybody, you have to adapt quickly, but also be focused on what the changes are down the line. So I think, retailers have already been looking at, okay, this is what's been happening this year, but what are going to be the lasting changes for next year and beyond in the way that it changes the way consumers shop in the immediate term in terms of channels, and what they want to buy, how they want it delivered, when they want to buy it, how much they're willing to pay, those kind of things. And then what will be the sort of medium to longer term changes as well that might be lasting from this period.
Agreed. Kind of thinking ahead to peak this year and then kind of into 2021, what do you think that consumers want retailers to know kind of heading into those periods and want them to address?
I think consumers want retailers that are going to almost deliver on their retail promise, in terms of service standards, reliability, particularly in terms of, delivery, for example. There's nothing more annoying than an unreliable service or something that gets, cancelled or delayed, and that kind of thing. And I think transparency is key too. So clear communications, that kind of thing. I think it will also be interesting to see, how all of this impacts the sustainability discussion that has been dominating this year. So the very early part of this year and last year, because we spoke about obviously the M&S on Deliveroo change. If there are going to be lots more services like that, you do wonder how that kind of meets with that kind of sustainability discussion. So I think consumers are going to want retailers that are sort of fair on price, that are accessible, and kind of transparent in communications.
Okay, interesting points. And I guess kind of carrying on that thinking a little bit. You mentioned at the top of the conversation that what's happened this year has brought new segments of the market into an online buying world, which is fantastic. And so it'll be interesting to see, whether they remain loyal to kind of e-commerce providers. So I guess my question would be, as we kind of move into 2021, so as we look further ahead into the future, there's been lots of discussion in and around the industry around shoppers having different habits. In your opinion, what do you think those kind of different habits are likely to be?
Well, I think that they will shop still more online. If I speak about myself, I'm a demographic that would be expected to already have been an online shopper, but in all honesty, I wasn't. I was very much a store-based shopper. And I love shopping online now, and I know that I'll continue, because the returning process used to put me off, and I think particularly for a lot of male consumers that probably was the case. But I will continue with it personally. I think next year it will be interesting to see how experience changes, because in-store experience and retail theatre and all of those kind of things has been another really big retail trend that sort of dominated the last 5 years or so, if not longer. And the focus was always on keeping consumers in store for longer, whether it was coffee shops or different in-store experiential elements. And obviously, during this period, the focus has been on getting consumers in and out of stores as quickly and safely as possible. So I think that will be interesting next year, because I think consumers, they will still want retailers who provide an experience. They still will want to shop with retailers that, provide a kind of branded world that you can step into. So retailers will need to find a way to sort of provide that in a safe way, basically. So I think that will be an interesting area to look out for. And then I think in terms of delivery and supply chain, I think a lot of these interesting models that I've spoke about just before, about drive-through models, and or even things we haven't spoken about the kind of virtual selling that we've seen and stuff like that. I think elements of that are going to stay as well, and they're obviously fairly new to the UK market largely. So it will be interesting to watch how they play out and the impact, and whether greater numbers of retailers start also offering that as part of their service.
Okay, interesting. Kind of shifting the conversation a little bit onto technology, if that's okay. Again, from your experience chatting with retailers and kind of other thought leaders from in and around the industry, have you got a view on the any technology or particular technology innovations, etc., that you think will have an impact on delivery and logistics, kind of in the wake of what's happened this year and moving ahead into next year?
Well, I guess the big one, if it's going to be a case of dealing with peak volumes through peak and golden quarter and that kind of thing, and greater numbers of shopping online, I think that the whole discussion around automation and AI combined with the human element is going to become even more pressing. When we've done studies and reports on where the UK retail industry is at in terms of its investment in, you know, automation and AI and that kind of thing, it seems like it's a sort of quite early stage still. But it seemed like there was definitely a movement in terms of greater numbers investing in that area. So I think that will be needed, and I think it will be interesting to see how that will sort of move things on. But it certainly seems like the best way that retailers are going to be able to fulfill higher levels of demand.
Sure. And I guess to round off the conversation, kind of final question from me, James, is what do you think will be the most important, or what do you think will be most important to the customer experience as we move through peak and into the new year?
As we move through peak and into the new year, I think that customers, they're going to want retailers that have a good availability of goods, and that, as I said before, kind of deliver on the promise that they're expecting from them. Through peak, people want to get things by when they're expecting them and that type of thing. So I think that's going to be the main concern over this period, I would say. And then going forward into next year, I do think it will be the retailers that consumers have engaged with most this year, and that have provided consistent customer service that they'll stay loyal to. I suppose the question would be for newer brands and newer retailers who weren't already a part of consumers' lives. It's probably a bit harder for them. So because they don't already have that relationship. But having said that, consumers are spending a lot more time in digital spaces, so there is a lot of time for discovery. So we'll see. Really, I think there'll be a balance between retailers going for the sort of tried and trusted brands and retailers they're used to, and also that kind of element of discovery as well.
Okay, interesting. Yes, I think one of the kind of key takeaways from this conversation really is about loyalty, isn't it? I think what you've talked about in terms of the experience and being consistent with the way that you kind of leave that sentiment of your brand with the consumer is going to be really key, and that will carry into kind of future peak periods and beyond. So
yeah, I do. Loyalty is sort of the currency, really, isn't it, in the market and the current conditions? The sector is under so much pressure. You really can't afford to kind of drop the ball at any stage in the customer journey, because loyalty is what will keep them coming back to your business. And while every business is under strain, that needs to be the primary focus.
Great insight. Well, it's been great chatting with you, James. Some really good thoughts. Yeah, thank you very much indeed.